Finally, we're in the last tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the slope tool, which will help us find the acceleration of your crane car. So right now we do have two graphs. The top graph is a position versus time graph, and the bottom graph is a velocity versus time graph. Well, if you recall the definition of acceleration, it's a change in velocity over a change in time. So based on the definition, it would make most sense to use the bottom graph since it has velocity on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. How you're going to find it is actually the slope of this graph, because if you think about slope, slope is rise over run. The rise being the change in the velocity, and the run being the change in time. So rise over run is, for this graph, change in velocity over change in time, which is the definition of acceleration. So now that we know to get the acceleration, I just need to find the slope of the velocity versus time graph. I just need to figure out how to do this. So first things first, I'm going to tap on the graph. Anywhere on the graph is fine. And then you'll have some numbers come up. Look at the units of these numbers so you don't confuse yourself. The top one's units, it's seconds. So this is just a time. The bottom one is meters per second, which is just a velocity. This is just telling you the data points, time and velocity for wherever I've selected it. Alright, so this is not the slope yet, but what you can do, and this is kind of delicate, so take your time. Since my flags here, from the blue line, I kind of like to think of them as flags on a pole. Since they're to the left, I can actually click and drag on the bottom one. And it's actually the top one, the darker of the two. So I told you guys this is kind of a delicate thing, so take your time. Oh! I actually tried dragging it right this time and to the right works, so just play around, be patient. You can see sometimes I struggle too. But if I drag it to the right, I can actually highlight a lot of the data. I'm going to actually highlight the majority of the data in this graph. Now the velocities actually disappear because in this highlighted portion the velocities are slightly different. So all I see are 2 times now the range that I have. Still don't have a slope, but what I can do is for whatever data I highlight, I can find the average slope of this data. The last thing I want to do is in the bottom left hand corner of the screen, you see that little box with the graph icon. You're going to tap on that, and then you're going to do apply curve fit. This is your slope tool. Now even though it says curve fit, right when I selected it, it says curve fit with linear next to it. So this is giving us a linear fit, which is nice. You can see in the little box with the data I have my y equals mx plus b formula. And in that formula, we know that m represents the slope. So for this graph, the slope of my data, my graph, is 0.013. There's no units on it, so you need to be mindful of the units in each of your x and y axis. My y-axis is meters per second, and my x-axis is units of seconds, so that would be a slope of 0.013 meters per second over seconds. So it's basically saying this is how much the velocity is changing in meters per second each second. You could simplify that to be meters per second squared, as we've learned in class, but sometimes I like to leave it as meters per second over second. Again, you're probably sitting there like, well, this was the constant velocity car. It shouldn't have an acceleration. The velocity shouldn't be changing. I agree. But if you think about the value of 0.013 meters per second each second, that is a very, very, very small change. So I would be okay with assuming then that the velocity didn't really have a drastic change. Now when you guys get your slope, you obviously have an accelerating crane car, so you will have a significant acceleration. It won't be like mine. Alright? Now before you take the screenshot, make sure that I can see this data in the graph. But once you have that and you're good to go ahead and screenshot it. And then this will be the final image that you upload onto your PDF document. Alright, so go ahead and try this with the crane cart. Once you get this, double check your acceleration's all good, and we are all done with our data and graphical analysis.